Welcome to the IonaHoops.com podcast with your host, Guy Flottico.
Some post-holiday blues for Gale Nation to cover here in Season 3, Episode 15 of the IonaHoops.com podcast. A humbling in Hamden has occurred, and one read of the IonaHoops.com message board and you realize hashtag Ledge Life is back in full form. We'll recap the rather strange road trip this past weekend. Also, a scheduling reminder, I have some extensive work travel coming, so there will not be an episode next Monday. We won't have a new episode until Monday, January 23rd, 2 weeks out. Sorry about that. Life gets in the way sometimes. So, we'll preview not only the two games coming up this weekend back at Home Sweet Home, we'll touch upon the one game coming up the weekend after that as well. And speaking of previews, Iona opens this three-game stretch on Friday against Fairfield, and who better to have returned to the podcast than Fairfield Frank Aquino, who joined us last season, if you recall. Fairfield's had their own frustrations, so be ready for some interesting banter. But first, we banter some Iona Iotas.
Iona Iotas.
Touchy subject right now, but where does the Iona blowout loss to Quinnipiac leave Iona in terms of computer ratings, potential NCAA seed, at-large picture, whatever you want to talk about? Well, first, let's look at the damage done. Iona is now 66 in KenPom after squeaking into the top 50 after the Marist win. The net ratings, from 36 after Marist to 57 after Quinny. That's pretty hefty damage. Do we still have a shot at large? Well, let's say Iona wins out all the way to the MAC final, loses to, say, Siena. We would be 27-7. Iona's only 4 in quad 1 and 2 games, right now anyway, with Quinny, the latest blemish on that list. We'd have an okay net and KenPom for sure, and would we be on the bubble? Probably. And if the NCAA considers last 10 games like they always said they did, we'd be 9-1 at that moment. So there's a chance. Probably not a great one, but there's a chance. I don't know if I'd consider our at-large hopes flat out dead, but they're certainly on life support. What about NCAA seed? Well, first off, right now, any brackets coming out today and through this week will have Siena as the MAC rep, as the Saints are in first place and we are not. But that aside, certainly if Iona does not lose another game all the way through AC, the Gales would probably be on the 12 seed line, which is where most brackets had them before the Quinny game. From there, any regular season loss would probably knock us down to a 13 at this point. Two more, 13, possibly 14 on the table. A third league loss probably shifts us down to a 14. You get the idea. Life in a one big league, folks.
Iona Iotas.
Well, with that aside, let's talk about the MAC race. As of the Iona Gales are not in first place. Siena tops the league with a 5-0 mark, while Iona sits at 4-1. From there, we have a stack of teams from 4-2, led by Niagara, down to 2-4 with Canisius. The bottom of the leaf is St. Peter's is 2-5, Marist at 1-4. So not wildly different than what we were expecting so far early on here in the MAC race, except for the whole Iona not wire to wire in first thing. As a reminder, Iona plays at Siena on Friday, January 27th, likely with first place on the line. And when this podcast returns on Monday the 23rd, we'll be hopefully recapping a successful 3-game stretch and juicing up that preview against the Saints. Oh, by the way, Siena's been dealing with injuries too, without star guard Javian McCollum and J.C. Johnson, and they're still winning. Just putting that out there. That guy Carm, you guys know I'm not the biggest fan of him, but all he does is win. And he's your MAC Coach of the Year if the season ended today, not our Hall of Famer.
Iona Iotas.
Raise your hand if you had the Iona women's team higher in the standings than the Iona men's team right now. That is, in fact, where we are today, as the Iona women are tied with Siena and Fairfield at 4-1 atop the MAC, with Quinny and Niagara close behind at 4-2. The Lady Gales put up 2 more wins since the last episode, a 10-point victory at home over Niagara and a 24-point rout at Ryder. Iona has 4 games between now and the next episode. Home versus Mount St. Mary's, at Quinnipiac, home versus Ryder, and at Siena. The Lady Gales would be in great shape if they took 3 out of those 4 the next time we regroup here on the pod. Good luck to Billy Chambers and the squad. Let's recap the 2 games from this weekend. One of the very few blemishes on the Patino regime thus far, consistency away from Hines. Specifically, we found out a year ago that no matter how much better you are than the rest, road games in league play are going to be wars. Further, we learned right before tip-off of Marist that Walter Clayton suffered a minor injury earlier in the day and would not dress for Iona's game at Marist. And with Quinn Szynski already on the shelf, there was reason for Iona fans to fret, right? Well, no, Iona absolutely demolished the Red Foxes 84-57. Dennis Jenkins went nuts, 23 points, 5 rebounds, 10 assists, no turns. Nelly had 19 and 12. Cruz Davis, career high 16. Ashima with 12. Keither Florence got run, had 5. Actually looked pretty good out there, I thought. Berg didn't shoot it well, but he did have 4 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and it was good just to see him back out there. He still doesn't look 100% to me. Offense was cooking, 55% overall, 41% from 3, just 6 turnovers. Patrick Gardner's a nice player for Marist, but he's out there by himself. Marist shot 36% overall, 27% from 3. Oh, by the way, Michael Jefferson also out with an injury for this game. So despite being really thin, this is one Iona needed to have against one of the Meeker Mac teams. After the game, Patino talked about how shocked he was by the performance. The team's best of the year, he thought. Well, if that shocked him, no wonder how he's feeling right about now. Now, I had a family event yesterday and couldn't go to nearby Hamden, for me, which is nearby Hamden. It's probably a good thing. I mean, yeah, we were missing 3 of our top 8 guys again, but to be absolutely pummeled by another MAC team in the Patino era, I wouldn't watch this replay. I'm never going to watch this replay, but the score alone tells me enough. Now, I get it. It was a perfect storm of being shorthanded against a pretty good and hungry Quinnipiac team wanting to prove itself. That, of course, is also now playing its best ball of the season. And also, from what I heard, the reffing was shaky as well. But a 23-point loss? I mean, I followed the live stats. Certainly the first half was our worst half of the season for sure. Certainly at that point, I wasn't expecting us to come back and win. Thought maybe we would come back and make that interesting. Come out of the locker room and trail by as many as 30. Wow. You know, we all know Patino is big on coach speak, and he's been harping on about our lack of depth all season. And even with the win over Marist, you can't say he was wrong, being that thin and having to rely on your young guys to step up against a decent, hungry team like Quinnipiac. While I expected more, it still shows me that once everyone is back, and Quinn sounds like he's going to be day-to-day the rest of the way, we probably won't delve beyond the top 8 or 9 once everybody's back, especially come MAC tourney time. We'll see. That's a ways away. Anyway, I won't get into all the gross stats in this one. It was a mess. We all know it. So let's find a couple of bright spots. Dennis tried to carry the team like he did against Marist. He didn't have a ton of support. He did finish with 17 points for 5 rebounds. He had 0 assists and 3 turnovers. Clearly, they were focused on him. Nelly finished with 10 points and 10 boards, but was just 4 of 14 shooting. It sounds like he just wasn't into it all day. Cruz Davis had 13. He didn't shoot it well either. He did lead the team with 3 assists. So at least he's getting a lot of run. It's good for him experience-wise. I do think he's going to play a role on this team, even when we are at full strength. But here's the brightest spot of day. Anton Brookshire finished with 14 points, 4 rebounds, was 5-11 overall, 4 of 10 from 3 in just 16 minutes. And he has just struggled all year long. So I'm good to see, if nothing else came out of yesterday, but that Anton found himself and might be a more reliable option on that bench now moving forward. If that's what we can take from yesterday, great. That's it. I got nothing else to say. So let's turn the page and look ahead to the next 3 games. Before the season, there were a couple teams that you could look at their roster and you felt pretty good they'd be in the thick of the MAC race, but will they get the coaching to do it? The Fairfield Stags fit that description. And, well, they have not lived up to the talent their roster displays. The Stags are just 6-9 overall, 2-3 in the MAC. All 5 of those MAC games were at home, and they haven't even played Iona yet. So, needless to say, they've been a disappointment. We've got a couple guys living up to preseason hype. 6'9 junior Supreme Cook, averaging 13.2 points, 8.8 boards. 6'3 Bowling Green transfer Caleb Fields is doing well, 12.8 points per game. 6'4 sophomore TJ Long has stepped up to average 9.5. 6'7 senior forward Alan Jean Rose doing okay, 8.1 points, 4.1 boards. But you'll notice I didn't mention one guy who seems to make shots pretty well against Iona. But it hasn't been making them all year so far for the Stags, and that's 6'5" senior guard Jake Wojcik. The kid just can't buy a three, shooting just 15% from out there. It was assumed he'd be a key weapon from the perimeter to let Supreme cook, but it hasn't materialized. And as a result, the Stags offense is ranked 308th nationally by Ken Pom. The team just can't make shots. 340th nationally in effective field goal percentage, 348th in 3-point field goal percentage. They're okay on a defensive end, do a decent job taking away threes, but their offensive struggles are what have held them back. And now hitting the road for the first time in league play, coupled with Iona's performance at Quinny, it's important for Iona to start fast in this one and put them away early and not let them find any rhythm on the offensive end. Once again, I was high on Ryder entering the season, and once again, they're disappointing me. Just 6-9 overall and 3-3 in the MAC. Ryder's done some good things on the offensive end, but just don't play very good defense. Of course, we remember what happened last March. Dwight Merry beat us. Well, he's back. He's leading the way for the Bronx again, 16.6 points, 4.6 boards, 3 assists per game, 39% from three. And the 6-foot senior guard has support inside in the form of 6'7" senior Mervyn James, averaging 12.5 points, 7.1 boards, and outside from 6'2" guard Alan Powell at 10.1 points per game. All three of those guys are lights out from the free throw line as well, so the Bronx can hurt you a lot of ways on the offensive end. The one thing about this team also is that they really, despite their struggles, they don't get handled too often. Outside of a 30-point loss at Rutgers, they tend to stay close, with single digits normally, with a 1-point loss at now super hot Providence to open the season. A more recent 6-point loss at Georgia in late December. And in MAC play, they started 3-0 and now lost 3 straight. One of those games was at home to Quinnipiac. They were without Murray and lost by 9. But again, all the other 2 losses very tight, including a close one at Siena on Sunday. Following Fairfield, Iona will need to play well again against a Ryder team that will have the full week to prepare for us. So, don't expect a cakewalk even at Hines. And in 11 days, Iona travels to Riverdale to take on Manhattan. Homecoming for Steve Mazziello of sorts. So, building's going to have energy. Jaspers have quietly found their way to 3-3 in the MAC, even though I think we all thought they were going to be just awful. Even though Ken Pom says they're the weakest team in the conference, and here they are, 3-3. Manhattan just able to hold off an Agger team at Draddy yesterday that had been playing pretty well entering the game. So in Riverdale, rivalry game, no walk in the park. Again, hard to dive too deeply into this one, given it's so far off. I mean, we have 2 games. They're going to have a couple games. But this matchup could come down to how well Nelly handles 6'9" Josh Roberts, who's averaging 11.9 points, 8.8 boards. But the Jaspers have a good backcourt too. Ant Nelson, 15.2 points. Samir Stewart, 14.9 points, 37% from 3. On the wing, they have Elijah Buchanan, 11 points a game. The Jaspers were never going to be a deep team this year after Maz's departure prompted several deflections. But the core of this team is talented, so that won't be a joke. Hopefully the Gales will be ready to go into Riverdale for sure. But first, they have the right to ship at home against Fairfield. The Stags are trying to right the ship themselves, of course, and have been for a while. And they're here to harp on that. Let's now welcome in Fairfield Frank Aquino to take a look at this one. Well, after yesterday's game, Iona fans are singing the "Woe Is Me" song after the Quinnipiac debacle. But hey, we've got nothing on Fairfield Frank Aquino. The Stags have just been breaking his heart for quite a long time now, and just the most recent episode was just a few nights ago, a tough home loss in overtime to Niagara. Frank, welcome back to the program. Let's drown our sorrows together. What's going on in Fairfield land?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting time to be a Stag. The highest of highs with having a brand new, beautiful arena. Love going there every time I go there, but when I leave the building is the question mark of how do I actually feel when I'm leaving the building? Because they started the season with 8 road games, and that was an absolute roller coaster. Starting off 0-4, going to New Hampshire, going to Wagner, losing there. I mean, Wake Forest and Xavier were known losses just going into them. But then, the last, the 3 games in Savannah, which was a very weird tournament. Even I spoke to players and they said it was kind of a weird setup, not a lot of fans. And the video play, I think Iona had a game against Santa Clara with the same video where it's like the AI technology back and forth. So that it was a little funky, but they started the season 2-6 with the last game being at Manhattan, which probably was the lowest of my lows at the time, losing to a beaten down Manhattan team on the road, but was hopeful coming back home to try to turn the script, right? We had 8 games at home, which ended up being 7 because the Drexel game got canceled due to COVID. That one's not being rescheduled, I'm being told. So now sitting here at 6-9, I really thought it would have been a 9-6 start, at least. So it's been a disappointing start, but the saving grace is there's still 15 games left in the MAC season to prove yourself and prove that this roster still has some fight left in them.
So a lot of people were high in Fairfield entering the season. There's a lot of good talent base to work with for sure. Most people probably had Fairfield top 4, top 5. So definitely, a non-pig as the season wraps up. And yet here we are looking up, and Stags are not into that top 5. Why? Well, what's missing in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'll circle back to the scheduling, right? The scheduling was poor. 8 games on the road was really a tough start for confidence. You look at the roster, it's really senior ridden, right? And some of these guys have an extra year. Several of them will probably come back. But I think the 2 key player-wise that really has hurt us is, Jake Wojcik isn't himself, right? He's struggled since his first year on campus, right? His first year on campus was the year that they made it to the MAC championship, and he was able to, get hot and hit some threes and all that good stuff. Since then, it's been like, single digits points per game. And this year he has 0 games with double digits, right? He has 1 or 2, I think, with 9 points, but he has no double digit games from a guy who averaged 13 2 years ago. So the struggles of Jake has definitely hurt us. He's starting to look like hopefully he's turning the corner a little bit. But that's number 1. I think number 2 is, a lot of people picked us 4th because, or 4th, 5th, whatever it may be, because of Bryson Goodine, the former top 100 recruit, a guy who was at Syracuse, a guy who was at Providence, even in a game at Providence last year, I think went 4 of 4 from 3 and had 12 points against Northwestern. So a guy who can really shoot it and thought he would be a 3-level scorer at this level, and played the first 4 games. I think he averaged about 7 points a game in 15 minutes. So super efficient. And I thought our offense to start the season, even though we were losing, looked, more competent at times than it has. And we spread the floor a little bit better. But he's been hurt. He has a knee injury that I think he got a cortisone shot last week, and hopefully he's on the road to recovery and coming back soon. And just being that extra guy off the bench, because when you look at this roster, Supreme Cook is doing what he has to do. 13-8, almost 9 rebounds a game. Caleb Fields has been a saving grace there too, about 12, 13 points a game as well. It's just that third scorer, right? And that's the issue right now. I went through, before this podcast, I went through all the stats to see, okay, what's the correlation, right? What player needs to score? What third player needs to score for them to do well? And I can't find it, right? I'm pulling straws to try to figure out, what's the X factor here. Even when TJ Long, who, I mentioned Jake turning a corner a little bit, but TJ definitely turned a corner. He had a 25-point game against Marist and a 19-point game against Siena. Then he comes out and only scores single digits against Niagara, right? So he struggled. But even when I look at his double-digit stats, like, okay, does Fairfield win when he scores, at a higher clip? And the team's like 3-3, right? So it's really hard for me to figure out, what the answer is right now. But if you look at a more holistic level, it's got to be defending the 3 is a big factor, right? They're actually 94th in the country in that. So that's going to be a big factor for them winning games in the future. Iona is actually 34th in the country in defending the 3 too. So, but they shoot it at a higher clip. Fairfield doesn't shoot it at a higher clip. So that's kind of their team X factor, in my opinion, is if you're not making threes, you got to defend threes because you got to keep pace with the other team.
Right. Yeah, because you can't trade twos for threes. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So you must feel like what is going on in this world. So you guys just had this homestand where it didn't go as well as you want. Then the homestand is over, and your first game is at Iona, and now it's at and probably a very angry Iona after
Yeah.
what's going to be what I can imagine a nightmare week of practice for this team coming off what happened at Quinnipiac. Now, again, we don't know the health of some of these guys. I think Walter Clayton will be back. We don't know about Quincy Lisinski. We don't know about Michael Jefferson. So Iona still might have some question marks in that regard. But that all said, are you feeling like, geez, what are we going to walk into here?
Yeah. I'm definitely worried, right? Regardless of who plays, Iona has those guys, right? They have a deep roster. You look at Berkshire last game; he stepped up, and I know you guys didn't win the game. You guys got blown out, but I think he had 16 points or something like that, or something in double digits.
Yeah,
yeah, something like that. So there's guards that will step up and play well. I'm from a Fairfield perspective, I'm more worried about the size, right? We have Supreme down low. We've been playing, our wing and Alan Jean Rose at the 4. He's more of like a wing slasher. So I'm wondering if Fairfield goes to a bigger lineup and has Supreme alongside Chris Mido, alongside Makai Willis, someone just bigger, because between Quinn and Nelly, it's going to be a handful down low. And, one of the stats I tweeted out the other day is when Fairfield out rebounds the other team, I think they're like 3-1. Right. So if they win the rebounding battle, they have a pretty good chance to win. It's going to be tough to do that this game. So I think the key for them against Iona, the other two keys I wrote down is getting to the line. I mentioned Iona shoots the 3 at a higher clip, and we haven't been. It's getting to the line. Fairfield's 59th in the country at getting to the line, and they're shooting about 71%, which as a Fairfield fan with our free throw woes the last 10 years, I think that's a pretty good number. And they can get to the line, that would be good. Supreme's improved his free throw shooting, which is, I think at the beginning of the season, I saw a stat that like per 40 minutes, he was like top 10 in the country in drawing fouls, but he's up to like 68% from the line, which is a good thing for us. I mean, he was down in the 50s his first year and then even low 60s last year. So he's improving that. So that's going to be a key. And then the other key for Fairfield against Iona, I think, is just distributing the ball, right? There's so many games where I see, like the last game against Niagara, an overtime game, they had 5 assists. It was either 5 or 6. I don't want to misrepresent it, but it was 5 or 6 assists in an overtime game. Like, you can't do that, right? But when Fairfield has 9 or more assists, they're 3-1. So they really need to get to 9 or double-digit assists and distribute the ball. It goes back to kind of what I talked about in the beginning, is finding that third score. Supreme's going to get close to a double-double every night. Caleb's going to have 14, 15 points. Who's that third guy? Is it TJ? Can Jake Wojcik, come in and score some points? Even some of our other guys, like the freshman James Johns Jr., like he's had a couple games where he's had 8 or 10 points. Can he distribute and score a little bit, right? So it's going to be a tough game. It's not a game I want to go, especially with everything going against Fairfield on the Quinnipiac blowing Iona out, and Iona going to be pissed on Friday, but. If they can do a couple of those things right, it kind of comes back to the perfect storm of what happened on Sunday with Iona. Quinnipiac plays their best game, Iona plays their worst. That's what happens. I mean, Fairfield's going to have to play their best game, and Iona's going to have to play pretty poorly for them to pull this one out.
Do you who's on the schedule for Fairfield after this game?
So after this game, it's I got it right here. So after this game, it's St. Peter's.
Is that Sunday?
Yep, that's Sunday. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it's Iona, then at St. Peter's, who's been struggling, and we beat by double digits at home. And then it's at home versus Canisius on Friday, January 20th. So that's a winnable game. I mean, kids come back on campus that week. It should be a loud one. To talk about the arena for a second. Every game that the kids have been on campus, there's been like about 1,000 students there, right? So each end zone basket has about 500 seats, and there's been about 1,000 students on either basket. So that's been a huge saving grace. I didn't look up the total average per game, but I think there's still over like 1,500 fans per game, even when the students are out, which is, in that smaller arena, it gets pretty loud. I don't know if you've come to a game yet or not.
Not yet. Nope. Well, how do the players feel about it? I mean, are they comfortable there? Because you've obviously everybody loves being at home, but now you have this shiny new building that I assume they're practicing in and all of that. But, it takes a while to get like used to being on a court, or do you attribute some of that to maybe why Fairfield hasn't maybe performed as well as you would have liked in these early games?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that, right? I wish it was just like, hey, they're adjusting. I think it's deeper than that. From the court perspective, I've talked to some of the players and they love it, right? They love the crowd. They love how loud it gets. Without a doubt, I hadn't looked at the seating chart yet for the Iona game, but I've heard from several people that game's going to be sold out, right? When you guys come to visit us. So
Shocker.
they're coming to, yeah, they're coming out in forces and they love it. Their homestand with the 7 games, they're 4-3, right? So they're above 500 on that. I wanted to see them go. My goal was 6-2, losing to Yale and Siena, but obviously a couple games turned the other way. I think it's deeper than the struggles of, getting used to the arena. I think it's more of execution, right? Down the stretch, up 5 on Yale at home, they lose by like 13, right? They were up 5 at half, excuse me. So then they just lost the lead. Even against Niagara, they were up, 10 points with 8.5 to go. Paulus freaked out on the refs because they weren't getting foul calls. And then it turned from there and they were down like 6 with 1.5 to go. And they came back and they hit 2 free throws with 0.1 on the clock to force overtime. But Caleb Fields and Alan Jean Rose were fouled out. So they had to play the overtime without their two of arguably their top 3 players. So I think it's just execution. It's just, they're missing free throw rebounds, right? There was a free throw rebound against Siena they missed. Again, even against Siena, they were down double digits. They came back within 2 with 2 minutes to go. TJ Long, who was hot in that game, takes a fadeaway 2, misses. We get the ball back again down 2, and gets stuffed on a reverse layup. So it's just coming down to like 1 or 2 plays in a couple situations. I really just think it's execution. I mean, like I said, these guys are very senior, but I don't know if they figured out how to win and close games in close situations right now. I think when Patino, what was it last year? You guys would say like Gale time or whatever it is, because those guys were so experienced. You have Patino at the helm and you would just close out games. These guys are struggling a little bit to, when they have the leads to really, close out.
Is there one newcomer for Iona fans to say, oh, this guy might be good, we should keep an eye on him in the coming years?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm a big fan of James Johns Jr., the freshman whose dad's a assistant coach on the team. Super athletic guy, can shoot the 3, has probably been one of the more aggressive players beyond Caleb Fields. And he really tries to get to the rack. He tries to shoot the mid-range. Having normal freshman woes, right? Like, I don't think he's been as productive as, like, say, a Cruz Davis. But I think the talent is definitely there. And that's a guy, if he sticks around a year or 2, I think he's going to be a really big impact guy. But also, I mean, this is your first time seeing Caleb Fields. I think you're going to like what you see out of Caleb. It was interesting coming out of Bowling Green. He's a guy who played more of the 2 guard. Bowling Green was a high scoring team too, and he was able to get his and get 6 or 7 points a game. So you had to know he was going to score at this level. And now he's kind of has the ball in his hands as a point guard. I like him a little bit more off the ball and creating his shots versus him trying to create the offense. But we don't really have that second ball handler. But overall, I think you guys will enjoy watching him. He's a guy who's, will turn the corner on a screen and get to the basket. He's a guy who's not afraid of contact, shoots free throws at a pretty good clip. And to start the season, shot 3s at like a 50% clip, but has kind of evened out since then. So he'll be a fun one to watch for the first time as well.
Well, even though I know you've been hurt by this team a few times over the season, you still seem very positive at the moment. You seem optimistic. I hope Iona fans hearing you here can take something from that and say, geez, it was just one game, guys. Hey, it was a perfect storm against Quinnipiac. Let's refocus and beat the snot out of Fairfield. No offense.
I mean, I love that narrative, right? Because I want you to think that you're going to beat the crap out of us. Because I want to, I think Fairfield thrives in that underdog role. Like, how did they get to the MAC championship that first, what was it, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
How did they get to the finals? It's because no one believed in them, right? I think the thing that hopefully it's going to break soon is, Coach Young, since he's taken over the team, is 1-6 against Iona. That only game that he had beaten Iona was when we did the COVID back-to-back games, and it was game 2 at home at the old Alumni Hall. And the last road game is January 14th, 2007, which is 5,843 days from when they play on Friday. So they have an opportunity to change history, right? I mean, at some point when you play roulette and you bet red 5 times in a row, it's going to come out, right? So I'm hoping that this is that 5th time, and Fairfield can make something unexpectedly, right? Like you said, it's going to be a really tough game for them.
But let's close on this then. It's just almost like a fresh start for Fairfield. You had the homestand, you kind of were expecting to get some wins. Now it's like, all right, we're on the road, we're going to be underdogs. Well, the guys relax and just play, and maybe you get a better result. Do you feel like that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I hate going back to this narrative because I know Iona fans hates hearing this, but it comes down to March, right? This is all, in theory, this is seeding, and then you got 3 games in March. So, hopefully 3 and not 4. But I'm just hopeful that Fairfield can put themselves in a position where where these kids are confident, and they can say, okay, I can do this. I can beat any of these 11, other 10 teams in the league. And just put yourself in a position, regardless of your seed number, to go out there and try to win some games, because that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah. All right. Well, Frank, it's been a pleasure having you on again. This is always fun for me because I always liked Iona Fairfield games over the years, and now I have somebody to banter back and forth with. So it's great to have met you in this past couple of years as well. So good luck on Friday to both teams. Hopefully no more injuries for anybody. I'm looking forward to coming to see your building in 3.5 weeks or whatever. So hopefully we can hook up then.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, Guy.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Fairfield Frank Aquino for joining this episode of the podcast. A bitter pill swallowed at the hands of the Bobcats, but will it leave a lingering aftertaste? Time will tell over the next 2 weeks. See you again on Monday the 23rd. In the meantime, go Gales.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the IonaHoops.com podcast. This podcast is a production of IonaHoops.com with publisher Guy Filatico. The opinions shared during this podcast are those of Guy Filatico, IonaHoops.com, and any featured guests. This podcast is not affiliated with Iona University Athletics or the university itself. Thank you for supporting IonaHoops.com.